So now, it is my pleasure to present our last Hub Talk of Pride Month and introduce our speaker, Justice Whitener of the Washington State Supreme Court. Her bio is very long and very impressive, so I'll do my best to synthesize it here for you all right now. Justice Whitener is active locally, nationally, and internationally in various community service activities. She speaks often on human rights, access to justice, and the rights and responsibility of the judiciary in ensuring the rights of all that appear before them. Justice Whitener is a member of many organizations and committees and serves as co-chair of the Washington State Minority and Justice Commission and serves on the board of directors for the International Association of LGBT Judges. She is a member of the International Association of Women Judges, the National Association of Women Judges, and the American Judges Association. Justice Whitener is the first Black woman to serve on the Washington Supreme Court, huge, the fourth immigrant-born justice, and the first openly Black LGBT judge in the state of Washington. So it is an honor to have her speak with us today. For the next 45 minutes or so, Justice Whitener will be joined by our very own Brandon Greer for a fireside chat, with the remaining 10 minutes open for audience Q&A. And you can use the chat pane for that, or you can use the raise your hand feature. Please understand that due to Justice Whitener's position, she's not able to comment on pending or impending cases, and that includes the current racial tension and violence going on in the United States, though we do have questions about that in a more acceptable way that works for the rules of the Supreme Court. So please keep all audience questions later on a bit more broad. So that is the end of my spiel. Thank you all so much for listening to that. And Brandon, I will let you take over from here.
Thank you so much, Melissa, for all that you do. And good morning, afternoon, or evening to HubSpotters all over the world joining in from different parts. I am so excited for today's conversation. And Justice Whitener, thank you so much for spending a bit of your day with us.
Well, thank you for having me.
And before I begin, happy Pride to you and to your wife.
Thank you.
I don't know if you found a way to celebrate. I know options are few, but I hope you've made some time to do so.
Well, we're celebrating. We just can't discuss it in this forum.
Right. I love it. I love it. Well, I'm gonna do my best to capture your life and your lessons in 45 minutes time, and it's a bit of a daunting challenge, but I'm going to do my best. I want to start off with your earlier days, though. You were born in the Caribbean, there in Trinidad. So take us back to your childhood and describe younger Helen, and her surroundings there, and what life was like for you.
Well, growing up on a small Caribbean island, Trinidad and Tobago, is wonderful. In a way, I really have never left. It's always with me. You know, it's part of me. It's Trini to the bone, we say at home. And I still even refer to it as home. I came here at 16 and I still say home. But it's a multicultural, multi-ethnic island. So, you know, my family is multicultural, multi-ethnic. We're a mix-up, a callaloo, whatever you want to call it. It's kind of different.
Yeah.
And different religions, everything. My family is so blended. My grandfather had 19 children. So that could tell you right there. And many have, you know, married different races and cultures have mixed. Food is mixed up. So it's just wonderful. And then you're talking about many friends from diverse backgrounds and beach lime, like we like to say. You know, you get out of school and most folks here might go to the library. I take the library with me to the beach. I'll sit down, you know, under a coconut tree and have some coconut water while I'm reading my book and stuff like that. So it was wonderful, it really was. And I finished, as I indicated, around the age of a little over 15 years. So I finished my high school there. But it's a different system. Let me point that out because it's under the British system. So we have O levels and A levels, and O levels are the equivalent of your high school level. So sometimes you can finish it early. So that's why when I came to the US at 16, it was a mixture of two things, to get my undergraduate degree, but also to take care of a medical condition. So the island is wonderful. That's why people like to go visit.
Yeah. Did you grow up with any siblings, or it's described?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
My father had two daughters before he married and met my mom. And mommy and daddy have 4 children. I'm the third in the middle. Very opinionated because, my sister was Miss Perfect and my brother was not. So I was in the middle and I was always compared to him, when mommy is disciplining me. And on the island, we say getting licks, huh? So you're pulling the belt and getting some licks. So when mommy had to discipline me, which was quite often because I was very opinionated, she would always say, I don't want you to be another Niger. This is my brother. Why you can't be like Karen? And I was like, well, why can't I not just be me? So it was nice, 4 of us growing up. But I also knew daddy's 2 older daughters. And I grew up with them as sisters. We never differentiated, half sister and whole sister. We were all family. So it was the 6 of us. 2 of them, however, my older sisters, one was in Venezuela, Rosalind, and Beverly. She came to the US quite early. So when they left, we didn't have that much connection, but we did keep in touch. It just wasn't as close as when they were home on the island. Yeah. And then my sister, when she graduated high school, she went to Scotland, and from Scotland to England and then back home. So I really thought that was going to be my trajectory into higher education. And because of my illness, I ended up coming to the US, and the rest is history.
And you came to the US, as you said, for 2 reasons. You attended Baruch College in New York, as well as for surgery. What was your initial reaction leaving Trinidad to come to the United States?
Well, I'd visited before. Most of daddy's family was abroad, and mommy's family, a lot of them came abroad as well. So I had aunts and uncles in the US, most of them in New York, Brooklyn, Queens, Bronx, So I'd visited the US before. I'd gone to Chicago. And when you live on an island, the only thing you could do is leave the island. So, traveling from the age of 6, going to England and that sort of thing, so the US wasn't new to me. But the reasons why I came was definitely one of not happy. It wasn't because I was coming to visit anyone. When I had completed my O-levels, I was doing my advanced studies, which is A-levels, with the intent of going to England to study. And I lost the use of my right side. So one afternoon after class, I couldn't move. My right side shut down. And the island back then didn't have good medical facilities and treatment. So they sent me to the US for medical reasons to assess what was going on. And during rehabilitation is when my cousin said, because I was really depressed, because I thought all my friends now are moving ahead and here I am stuck in the US and, I can't move and my life is just going to be ended. And she said, girl, stop being down on yourself. Why don't you not just apply to go to university? And I was like, I can't go to university, I haven't finished my A's. And she said, no, your O's would be the equivalent of a high school diploma here. So try. And I did, and I got in. And that's how I was able to start, at 16. It wasn't because it was planned, it's because of my medical situation and rehabilitation here. So the undergraduate degree that normally would have taken anyone 4 years took me 5 because I had relapses. My side would go out and stuff. So yeah, and that's how it started.
Yeah, and I know the chronology might be a little bit out of order, but around when, with just all that going on, did your identity as queer, as a gay woman, start to take shape? Was it sort of closer to when you were moving or when you were in the United States?
It's funny you asked that because I came out when I was 19. But when I look back on it, I think I always knew.
Yeah.
I remember when my mom, we had different bedrooms. My sister was gone, so I got my own room. And my baby brother, he got my older brother, he had left. And I had bunk beds in my room because I used to share my room with my little brother. And mommy was trying to figure out, well, what sort of, bedroom set should we get you? And I wanted a full or queen size bed because I wanted my girlfriends to come visit so we could play house. Needless to say, how house went for me.
For sure.
But I think going back then and thinking about it, I think, it's like you always knew. It just never was something that I acted on. Because you have to also remember it was illegal to be gay in Trinidad and Tobago, and that only changed actually in 2018.
Wow.
Which I'll get to because my wife and I went home in 2016 and started the discussion. And that was an interesting trip because it came about by the US Embassy after my appointment to the Pierce County Superior Court. But looking back, I think I always knew. In the US, however, I was going to school in Gramercy Park, which is close to Greenwich Village. And that was an eye-opener because I would go to the park after school and just kind of hang out because they had musicians and I love music. And one day I was there and I saw, this woman and this other one. And the way they were interacting with each other felt natural to me. So needless to say, I kind of eased myself around over to where they were standing, to introduce myself, say I was new. And it turned out Allison, because they became good friends of mine, Allison was from Guyana, which is in South America, but it's predominantly African descent. And they speak English. And her partner, Jamila, that's the first gay couple I had met. And I remember leaving that feeling so empowered, so I was about 18. And I was like, this feels right. Because not that I didn't have men approaching me. I just always told them we could be buddies, just nothing else. I had an African guy in undergrad who wanted to marry me. I said, well, that can't happen.
That happened.
Yeah, so I told him, I said, because I am gay.
Right.
And it didn't click on him. And he kept pursuing. And I said, look, I am not into you. My preference is women. And he's like, oh, that's fine. You can be one of mine. And I was like, one of, No, not happening. So that was another instance. So I went through these experiences between 16 when I started undergrad and 19 when I came out, and I had to process, how am I going to tell my parents? The nice part is they're in Trinidad. The good part is I'm here. But I love my dad, and I really, I admire him immensely. He's passed now. Mm-hmm. And I waited till Daddy came to visit. And he was making me breakfast one morning. And I went into the kitchen to help him. And I said, Daddy, I have something to tell you. And he said, you remember these things so vividly now that I'm speaking to all of you. But he said, what is it? And I was really scared. And I'll let you all know that right now, because if I lost anybody, I really didn't want to lose my dad. My mom, that's fine. My dad, no. My siblings, fine. My dad, no. So when I said, Daddy, I am gay. And my father looked at me. He had just finished some eggs. And he walked straight into the dining room and left me standing in the kitchen. And I was near tears. I thought, maybe I should have just kept it to myself. Nobody had to know from home. But he went to put the eggs on the table and he came back in the kitchen and he said, are you sure? And I said, yes. And he said, and I'm going to do it just like my dad did. He said, girl, that is fine. I love you anyway. And he went back into the living room. And I was like, oh, good. Now I can face the world. And needless to say, I never looked back since. But he also told me, you're going to have to tell your mother. I'm not doing it for you. So I am not telling, I don't know if any of you know a Caribbean mother or West Indian mother, but I'm not telling her in person. So I picked up the phone and I told mommy over the phone. And needless to say, like a typical West Indian mother, she lost it. Oh my gosh, what are people going to say? You're going to embarrass me and all of this sort of stuff. And there's something to say about being empowered and having my dad, And when I talked to her, he wasn't there. And I said to my mother, and I said, Mom, I love you. I'll always love you. You have 4 children. Now you have 3. And I hung up the phone. That was it. And I didn't speak to my mother for quite a while. You know, it was quite a few years. But it was one of the most empowering and inspiring moments of my life. And I've never, ever been in since then. I said, the closet is for my clothes. I just wear them, that's it. So I've always lived my authentic self since that day.
That's wonderful. And you mentioned 2018, which feels crazy, but also a bit conceivable. So 2018, it became legal to be out, and you couldn't be, it wasn't criminalized any longer. Returning back to the island with your wife, how did that feel? And you know, how were you received?
Well, I probably need to tell you how that came about.
Yeah.
So 2015, I was appointed to the Superior Court. And I was just real happy, you know, I'm gonna go to work. Everybody knew I was gay, you know, knew I was married, that was good. And then we get a call. My judicial assistant comes into chambers and she said, Judge, who do you know from the state? What was it? The State Department. And I said, I don't know nobody from the State Department. So I started thinking, well, I know my papers are fine. I'm a citizen. So why these people following me? That's the first thing. The immigrant in me went right back to that. So I took the phone call, and it turned out because my mother, oddly enough, when I got sworn in, the proud Caribbean woman came out. She claiming me now. The proud Caribbean woman came out. And she, somebody from a newspaper at home did actually something like this. It was a video conference interview. And next thing you know, there was an article in the paper that said, this Trini is a judge, with me sitting down in my robe, you know, and it went viral. Well, it got in the hands of someone in the US, at the State Department. That's the reason for the contact, because it turned out, and I found this out later, that President Obama had declared June of that year, 2015 or 2016, to be LGBT month and Caribbean American Heritage Month. And since they came across that paper, I was the ideal person they thought would be willing to go back to Trinidad, be visible, and maybe start the change that was needed, the impetus to start that change. So after that, I said, yes, I would be interested, but first I have to talk to my wife. And they said, of course. So I picked up the phone afterwards and I called my wife, Lynn. And I said, babe, you won't believe what just happened. I got this call. They want us to go to Trinidad. And she was like, cool. And I said, you know, it's all expense paid. They'll take care of everything. And she's like, fine. I said, but there's one other thing I need to tell you. You know, it's illegal to be openly gay at home. So we could get arrested. Now, my wife is a retired command sergeant major out of the Army, and she's also an attorney. This fool looks at me and she says, when I told her that, she's like, okay, I'm gonna pack my toothbrush. I said, babe, if they arrest us, you won't be taken your toothbrush into the jail. So we took it lightheartedly, you know, we kind of chuckled about it and we went. We talked to all levels of the courts. There we talked to government officials. And in 2017, a young man, Jason Jones, a friend of mine, he's in England, Jason decided to put the law, to take it to court. And he, the environment was rife, you know, they were already percolating from 2016. It was perfect timing for him. And then in 2018, the High Court found it unconstitutional and threw it out. So it's been amazing, the journey, you know, from the island perspective. And now they had gay pride ever since, you know, they had their pride parade. So I can't wait to join them for one, you know, it's gonna be a real carnival going on down there for that. We have Carnival too, so I could just imagine.
Totally. That's an amazing story. And I think we should interview Lynn too on a future Hub Talk. So she's a fighter. I want to back up a little bit. We didn't really discuss how you came to be an attorney and ultimately a judge, but sort of, what was the inception of that thought? When did you first think I want to work in law? Was it in New York or earlier?
No, my background was international marketing, and I left New York and took a job in Anchorage, Alaska. That's another story. Island girl in that cold weather. I have a moose story for you on that. But I ended up there, and then it got too cold for me. So I was like, I'm through with this. I'm heading back to either New York or I'm going home to Trinidad, go from that cold to some island weather. And I got thinking about it, and I chatted with a friend of mine who actually was in Washington State. And she's like, don't go back to Trinidad, don't go back to New York, come to Washington. I said, what is in Washington? And she said, you're gonna like it. Why? Because she said, it's very much like home. So what about this place that it's like home? And she said, well, at home we have wet and dry. Well, Washington has a lot of rain, so it'll feel like home. Very little winter, it's wet and dry. And I was like, okay. And I came, and you know what, she's right. It's very much like the islands, very lush in a way, and the people. So I came here, but I couldn't get a job in international marketing or even marketing. So I took an accounts receivable job at an accounting firm in Bellevue, Washington. And one of the accountants was also an attorney, and I had done a project for him. And he liked my presentation of the project. And he also said to me that he thought I had really good analytical skills, and had I thought about law school. I hadn't thought about law school. I'm just living day by day trying to get by. And I thought I'd be a teacher anyway, and that didn't happen in undergrad. So why not? So I did ask him, where did he go to law school? And he said, well, his law school was UPS Law, but it's now Seattle U Law School. And I was like, okay. So I did some research and I checked on that. I didn't even realize there were 2 other law schools in the state. I just figured out wherever he went, I'm gonna check it out. And then I realized you have to take the LSAT. And then I realized just how poor I was because I couldn't afford to take the LSAT. So I took the book out of the library and sat at my kitchen table and worked through that and got into law school. And that's how law became the thing for me. But I was an unusual law student in that my ex at the time, we were raising her 4 grandchildren who were victims of the war on drugs. Their mothers, became victims of that, drug addicted in prison. And so we took them in, and we're talking 6 months to about, Tamika was eight, so 6 to 8 years old, 4 girls. So I had 4 children I was raising. I was holding down 3 jobs. I was a teaching assistant for criminal law. I worked at the bank at night doing 10 key, and I also, this is my first year, worked at the AG's office. And I realized what I wanted to do was trial work. So I moved around a bit and eventually got to prosecutor's office, then did public defense and did my own firm for a few years. And while I was a public defender, I was in front of a particular judge. And he approached me one day after work, and he said, have you considered pro temping? And a pro tem, is an attorney that sits in lieu of the judge when the judge isn't there. And I said, no. I didn't tell him I didn't know what a pro tem judge was. I just said no. And he said, you should consider it. So I checked into it, and only to find out I only at that time had 3 years of experience, and I believe you needed 5. So I kept it in the back of my mind. And then I started my practice after putting in some time, and I immediately thought about that. So I also got an opportunity to sit on the bench, and that's when I started pro temping for him, and the other judges just allowed me to on their dockets. So I got a lot of that experience. And then in 2012, my wife was like, they're opening up a new position based on the population. The statutes require a certain number of judges in the county based on the population. And she saw somewhere where they were, so I applied, didn't get it. I ran that year, 2012, didn't get it. And I then went to the Board of Industrial Insurance Appeals, put in 2 years, then the governor saw me, and that's when I got into Pierce County Superior Court, and the rest is history. But at the time I got to Pierce County Superior Court, you know, I've been living my authentic self and being my authentic self and my authentic life for so long that I didn't realize that I had made history. And one of my colleagues, she's in the legislature, she said, "You do know you're the only openly Black LGBT judge in the state?" And I said, "No, I just knew I was one of a handful of Black judges in the state, but I never had even thought about it that way." Right. And that's when things started to sink in for me that this is bigger than me, you know? Yeah. And then after putting in 5 years and then have the governor put me on the Supreme Court, where I get to join a diverse bench to include one LGBT justice, Justice Mary Yu, I was in seventh heaven. I was like, geez, more diversity than I've had my entire career sitting in one spot.
Well, I want to talk about that because, you know, you wear many hats, right? You're a member of the Black community, you identify as a member of the disabled community, LGBT community.
Yeah. Immigrant.
And you know, the first TED Talk I watched of yours that drew me in was you talk about like the link between, you know, claiming your identity and owning your self-worth. You talk about it. And it's an inextricable link. And I want to know, how did you come to do that yourself and then ultimately become an advocate for people in those communities?
I don't know if I even realize a link. I think growing up on the island, seeing people of color in positions of authority, going to my mother's graduation, I was 10 years old when she graduated from university. I think it instilled in me a sense of I can do anything I put my mind to. And then when I came to the US, and you have to remember now, I came through a disability, my lens, I believe, started changing because I started seeing how people could be discriminatory, cruel, you know, a number of different ways. And in that process, I then realized that who I thought I was and didn't have any examples of, here I'm in Greenwich Village watching 2 women, African-American women, being just normal, being themselves, you know. I could have run up and hugged them. I still can. You know, it's just, it just gives you such a feeling of belonging. But I'll say this, I was always headstrong. Remember, I started by telling you I would get plenty licks. It's because I was my parents' why child. You can't tell me not to do something without telling me why, you know, because I would always come up, but why? And then when they gave me an answer, but that don't make sense, so why? You know, so I was considered a little obstinate. Now you look at it and it'd be like, oh, she's so, you know, she was so strong within herself. So I think I came out of the womb probably a little different to begin with. Opinionated, not afraid to be myself, willing to take the licks or the consequences for it. So putting all of that together and understanding my journey, it makes perfect sense to me that I have owned every aspect of who I am. So my self-worth came from standing my ground when others weren't even standing with me. I had a cousin at home who was openly gay, Russell, and he went through transitions, and I was very close to him. He went through his transition of trying to figure out if he was transgender. So Marissa came out. But for me, it didn't seem abnormal. It just seemed Russell, my cousin, you know? So I think that also plays on why I speak up for the transgender community, especially the Black transgender community, because of him. I did see how he was treated, but I didn't realize it was in the law and it was okay, you know? I just thought people were just fools and just evil and, you know, stupid. I just didn't realize that at that age, you know, this cultural upbringing. In fact, I was shocked at my mother's reaction, you know, because I'm like, but you have family members who are gay, you know, why is this? But Caribbean culture is very interesting, you know, and back to your question of my self-worth, I think I had to build my self-worth. I didn't have examples out there for me, and I still don't when you think about it. If I'm the only openly Black LGBT judicial officer in the state, I mean, I started asking my wife, you better do a Google search. Let's see if there are any in any other state, you know, on the Supreme Court. What is this? Because I mentor a lot, and it's important to me that our bench be reflective of the people they serve. And I've always been here. So, you know, my bench wasn't serving me. So understanding your self-worth, I think it takes understanding who you are, your limitations as well as your pluses, and being comfortable in that. But that also takes some courage. And I'm only saying that now because I've had to look back, because I've always been Helen, you know. I come into a room as Helen. I remember I was a Rule 9 legal prosecutor. And this other prosecutor, we just met and we're in court, and she says, so what does your husband do? And I looked at her and I said, I don't know what he does, but she, and I just went on. Because it was normal for me, and you should have seen her face. And of course, everybody else in the courtroom was probably kind of, because this is about 20 some odd years ago. But that's been me. Just be yourself. They'll fit in, they'll figure it out, you know. We can't be silent anymore. We can't be pushed aside anymore. No, that didn't even make sense to me. It still doesn't to today, you know. We're different. As I always say, we have differences, but we're not truly different. You know, that's when I coined in my TED Talk. And I say it all the time. You know, we walk into a room and LGBT, and it's like family. And if you ain't had that experience, then you ain't LGBT. But you walk into a room and you see each other, and, you know, we just embrace each other. We just, all this color stuff and all that stuff kind of goes to the side to an extent, all right? Because we still have issues within our LGBT community. You know, Blacks are marginalized, Blacks transgender are at the back of the line, you know. And we need to be a little bit more inclusive. We actually have the answer to solve a lot of society's problems, really. Because we understand discrimination. We have allies within the LGBT community who are white. They gain access. Speak up. Otherwise, you're wasting a seat at the table. You know, move over. I could sit there and maybe talk for you. We need to understand within our own community, we are also have some exclusiveness about us.
Absolutely.
We need to be a little bit more inclusive. You know, when I see you, I see you. When you see me, as you can tell. Supreme Court Justice, that's a title. And that's why it probably shocks many of you that I'm so down to earth. Every time my mentees tell me that, I chuckle. It's a title, you know? Today I have it, tomorrow it's gone, but guess what I'm always a lawyer.
Absolutely.
I'm always gonna be me. Yeah. Can't get away from that. So I think I lost your question.
I love everywhere you've taken me, so I'm good to go. You could just keep talking. The rest of the 20 minutes left. You bring up a point on inclusion. Deborah Bass was the first out federal judge, and she was appointed.
Yes.
She passed away in February, sadly, and Keith Kistler, the first state Supreme Court judge who's out, was appointed in 2003. So you're a Black gay man interviewing a Black gay judge in the state of Washington. It feels like that's right, but I'm curious, how have you observed, LGBT progress in the judiciary, not just for judges, but for clerks and for your entire sort of operation? What are you seeing?
The LGBT community is a microcosm of the whole. So as a Black woman, not seeing many people of color on the bench, think about it for the LGBT community. We have a line going, white males up front, then I would say Black males, then, Black males and white females might be even, but you guys still are ahead of the Black women. And then add LGBT to that, and you might find the white men may stay up front in the line, but then they may slide back a little bit, and then they start realizing, wait a minute, there's something here about this equality thing or this equity thing, wait a minute. And then now think about it, you have transgender individuals who are afraid to travel. A friend of mine in Florida, he was afraid to travel. Why? Because, going through this thing and then having them pat him down and all of that, or having to disclose. It's like we're always coming out. The more we normalize things for people, I think the further along we'll become. But as far as LGBT on the bench, in the judiciary, in the legal profession, there isn't enough. We need to mentor and pull more in. Normalize this whole profession, normalize the criminal justice system, normalize the civil justice system, normalize it, because we have always been there, but we have never felt so free and comfortable to be open, to be seen, to be heard, to be understood. We have gained power where we can demand those things, but we've always been there, always. And I always speak from my truth, so that way I can get around my canons. So I intend to always mentor, speak my truth. And yes, it touches on a number of different hot buttons, but my lens are always from a place of exclusion. I have always been the other, the immigrant, the outsider. The LGBT, the outsider, the Black person, the outsider, the woman, the outsider. I've always been the outsider. So the beautiful thing about the law for me is working within a framework that where I've always been outside, bringing that inside and forcing them to reckon with it. Because it says, one, we've always been qualified. And think about it, we have had to be exceptionally well qualified just to even move forward with those that don't have those limitations, those labels that society likes to place on us. So there's a lot of work to be done. There's a thing called a gavel gap as far as the judiciary, but you could take that gavel gap and make it a whole gavel gap situation in regards to the profession. There's a lot of work to be done, but I live by three things. Be invisible, because there are many who can't be visible. So, to get to this position or to have a privileged spot and not be visible for those folks would be a misuse of my oath to myself. So be visible, be vocal, speak up. Don't sit there and have the gay jokes be told and not say anything for fear that, you will be seen differently. Hell yeah, you'll be seen differently because you are different. That's the beautiful thing about us. We are different, but we're not allowing them to see our differences. So they think within, this square box, and we like bubbles and circles and lines and color. So we are different. So be visible, but be vigilant about it. Once you've made that decision to be your authentic self, be vigilant about it, because there by the grace of God go I. Whenever I see someone losing, Black people, we have the situation going on, we have allies now who are seeing someone put their foot on a Black man's neck and he dies in front of you, okay? We have a COVID-19 pandemic, where people are spitting on Asians, you know, from a place of ignorance. Does it sound familiar to you? Because it sounds very familiar to me. As a Black person, having something like that be done. As an LGBT, having somebody call you outside of your name. I had someone call me a faggot in my courtroom. And I smile because you see that triangle in the back there of me, because I'm in my virtual office, but that's my real office.
Right.
It was up on the bench, so I just looked at it, smiled, and looked back and said, well, at least he kind of figured out something. And I just continued on. So the folks in my courtroom kind of chuckled. You could tell it was a little uncomfortable for them. But I'm not going to have that person, who was a guy, take that away from me. And he was actually a Black guy. So I was like, yeah, you know, you get it all different ways. But you got to be vigilant and you got to stand for something. Otherwise, you've wasted your time here. And we have limited time.
I love all of that, but your quote, "But for the grace of God, there go I," is one that I learned when I was a kid.
Yes.
Powerful and so true. I want to shift gears a little bit and talk a little bit about the letter that you and your colleagues wrote. And it was an unusual form of commentary. I'll read a quote from it for the audience, but it was in response to the backdrop of events that have exhausted and shocked a lot of people around racial tension and injustice. And so the quote I chose was this: "Our institutions remain affected by the vestiges of slavery, Jim Crow laws that were never dismantled, and racist court decisions that were never disavowed. The legal community must recognize that we all bear responsibility for this ongoing injustice and that we are capable of taking steps to address it if only we have the courage and the will." So, you know, when you're Black, reading something like that is immensely encouraging. And I want to know, you know, what prompted and eventually moved you to write that?
Well, I didn't write it. And I'll tell you why I didn't write it. Because, and as a backdrop for everyone, the court wrote this letter, and I'll tell you in a minute who, which is why representation matters, in response to the killing of Mr. Floyd. And our Chief Justice wanted to do something, and she's a white female, but didn't know what to do. I wasn't going to make anybody comfortable. I basically was so angry that I did not want to have a discussion unless it was going to be a discussion moving the agenda forward. One of our colleagues, Justice Mary Yu, the first LGBT justice on the Supreme Court here, wrote the letter. She then sent it to me to ask for my input, and I read it, and I said, "You were able to put into words what I could not at this time." Because the words that were going to be coming out of my mouth were not going to be judicial. I'm just keeping it real. I did not feel, because I teach and I lecture, and I teach and I lecture on bias. And I don't think it was my place to educate at that juncture. I'd done enough educating. If they didn't get it, then that's on them. You know, I was just done, really done. And she took all of this, you know, because I wasn't the only one feeling this. We also have our first Native American Supreme Court justice on the bench, and we have the first and only Latino male. So we were all feeling this and could not put it into words. And Justice Yu did. We then read it and we agreed. And then we, of course, shared it with the entire bench. And we were really happy when our colleagues came together and signed off on it. But it was needed. I'm tired. You know, we had a deep discussion at the table. I'm tired. I'm tired of saying things that are not believed. I'm tired of experiencing and sharing things that are questioned. I did a program in my county in 2017, and I brought in girls from marginalized backgrounds, like my background, LGBT, immigrant, Black, you know. And I brought in judges and justices with that marginalized background. It was extremely successful. The girls were empowered. We actually learned a lot from them. Mm-hmm. After doing that, I was placed on a white supremacist website, and I was called the N judge, trying to empower and inspire the N children. Now, I had an opportunity to shut up and go away and be quiet, not in my DNA. I exposed it. You know, I made it part of the conversation. It is things that needs to move the agenda forward. So these types of things were already percolating. And I think getting to this level with that sort of representation at this level is extremely important. So that letter was, I think, a roadmap to the judges on our courts, to the individuals who are part of our legal community, to know, you know, there are canons and there are certain things you can't speak on, and there's a way you can speak on things. But at the end of the day, you can speak. It's how you speak, so that you don't run afoul, in my case, of my canons. I can speak my truth. I have experiences after experiences of being a judicial officer. That's why I told you it's a title. Going into my building with my wife, my old office with the Superior Court, and using my access card to get in, and being stopped by a white security guard, you know, and his reasoning is I didn't look like I belonged. So once he wanted us to go through the metal detector, and my wife, you know, military, she wanted to comply. I'm not military, I'm sorry. Get your supervisor. Supervisor comes down. Oh, Judge Whitener, you should have seen this guy's face. Then he looks at me and had the audacity to say, you should have told me. Now my picture is on the wall with all of my 21 colleagues. There were 22 of us. And my courtroom is around the corner, but I should have told him after he basically, you know, minimized us. I should have told him I was a judge. I turned to him and I said, it shouldn't have mattered. It should not have mattered who I was, because it was clear I had a right to be there. I had access to the building with my card. But that's the sort of thing that, you know, we go through. So that letter, I think, put all of that stuff in such a beautiful form, something I can't claim to have had the ability to do because I was just so enraged.
That's amazing. The bench, as you've alluded to, is uniquely diverse and yeah, the most diverse benches in the country. How did it get to be so diverse?
We actually had governors who made good decisions, I say. Justice Gonzalez was appointed by the last governor, Governor Gregoire, making him the first Latina man. We had Justice Smith years ago. He was Cuban and African American, and he passed. After that, we have Governor Inslee. And it's Governor Inslee who has appointed the last 3 Supreme Court justices, women, and women of color, and women from diverse backgrounds. So you have Justice Yu. She became the first Mexican and Chinese, Asian American, LGBT justice. And then they saw her with Justice Gonzalez and realized, well, I guess we could let another one in. So they let Justice Montoya Lewis in, and she's Native American and of Jewish descent. And 3 are in, and it's like, oh, well, they didn't dismantle the whole system, so here we go, another one. And, you know, I came up, and you have to remember, these are very competitive processes. So I remember when the governor appointed me to the Pierce County Superior Court, I was the second Black female at the time, and I was the only Black female that sat at that time. The other one was gone. He said something, and he said, all of my marginalizations, but he said, I'm super qualified. And I remember that, and I still remember it, because I think it's a wonderful commentary, but it's a sad commentary. Because in order for me to get there, I had to be super qualified. In order for them to get there, they had to be super qualified, you know. And hopefully we'll get to a point in time where we can just all be qualified, extremely well qualified, and not have to have this super qualified attached to our labels, you know. But it's true, we have to work 100% harder and 100% better just to be considered equal.
Totally, yeah, you know, and I think I speak for a lot of people here. We are so glad you're on the bench, and so glad you occupy the seat you do.
Thank
just
you.
to respect your time, I'm going to avoid the Pandora's box of Q&A, but actually ask you one last question that's relevant to HubSpot. We're a tech company, and in your home state of Washington, or your current home state of Washington, is no stranger to large tech companies. Keeping names out of the question. What can we be doing to further the pursuit of justice, to further the pursuit of equity? We play a role too, and I'm very curious to get your thoughts there.
And I lost you in part of your question. So let me see if I got it right. You're asking, since you're in a tech company and tech background, what can you do in fostering change? Is that what I'm hearing?
That's right, particularly as it relates to justice and equity. That's right.
Well, I think what COVID-19 showed us is that our system and the justice system is very archaic in how it's operating. And technology is the way to move forward more efficiently and less costly when you think about it overall. Initially, the infrastructure that needs to be built will be costly, but in the long run, it will pay for itself. Implicit bias. I'm quite sure all of you have had training on implicit bias. And there's no difference between implicit bias and explicit bias to the receiver. If you don't get anything else, I want you to get that. There is no difference between implicit bias, which is your unconscious, subconscious awareness of your bias, and explicit bias to the receiver. Because to the receiver, it's always been explicit. Because I can't read your mind, that means you have manifested it. And the reason I'm telling you as techies about that is because you are the ones that put together apps and systems that can be utilized more efficiently. But you need to do it through the lens of not necessarily trying to avoid biases, which is wonderful, but work on the impact it has on the receiver. So if you can look beyond just understanding your own implicit bias as you've put together all these different computer technology apps, all of that stuff that you're experts on and I'm not, just make sure it's easy, I can use it. When you put together that stuff and you're utilizing your techie expertise, it's wonderful that you're aware of it, but also start thinking of the impact. Because in order for an individual like me, a marginalized individual, to know about your bias, it means it has been manifested, because I cannot read your mind. So when you put together an app, and the app has the effect of marginalizing a subset, then you have not really created anything that is inclusive. And as I said, it's a slippery slope. Today is me, tomorrow is you. Well, let's talk about us as the LGBT community. You're creating apps for the heterosexual community. Just make sure when you're creating those apps, you're not being exclusive of yourself. Think big, think outside the box. Because it's very easy to be sitting in a room and you all are all on, your computers and you're doing your thing. I've had court utilize technology from different firms to put together, let's say, something to explain what commissioners do. And in reviewing it, one of the slides had one individual being colored in. And they didn't see that as offensive, and especially where it was placed. So I had to talk to them about it, and they ended up pulling it because they didn't realize it looked like it was being blackfaced. And then the words that were going to be used with it, you know? So think about it. You know, we've seen a lot of this in marketing, and having a marketing background, maybe I'm a little more in tune to it. But think outside the box and be very careful of the skill and the expertise you have being utilized by the heterosexual community. And in the long run, it's hurting you and I.
Absolutely. I want to say collectively on behalf of HubSpot how appreciative we are of you. Thank you so much for being with us today. This was an incredible talk. To the rest of HubSpot, happy Pride. It was wonderful to see everyone's faces. And thank you again, Justice Helen Whitener.
Thank you, everybody. Love you all.
Take care.
Bye.
Thank you, Justice. Have a great day.
You too. Bye-bye.